Taken from the book Evangelism, page 609, we read, "After the fall, the nerves became the channels for Satan's electric currents by which he casts a spell over the bodies and souls of man." As we look now at a spinal nerve impulse conduction with the two images shown here of the spinal cord, the first one showing different parts of the spinal cord, the posterior white column, the gray commissure, the central canal, the posterior gray horn, and at the bottom of the image, the lateral white column, the anterior white column, and the anterior gray horn. Notice that the posterior gray horn and the anterior gray horn on both sides almost form angel wings, which is reporting us back to the most holy place and the angels that look at the law of God and guards the Ark of the Covenant. We know also that there are horns on the Ark of the Covenant and also on the altar of incense and on the altar of burnt offerings. So the terminology seems to come back here from the language of the sanctuary, and so is the spinal cord called a horn as well. And Christ is called the horn of our salvation. Now the second image, the cut again of the spinal cord, is showing an impulse that has been received now from the receptor, the integumentary system or the skin, returning to the spinal cord, where the bottom one represents a motor neuron with an impulse going to a muscle. A few words now on the impulse conduction. The human nervous system consists of billions of nerve cells or neurons plus supporting cells or neuroglial. Neurons are able to respond to stimuli such as touch, sound, light, and so on, conduct impulses, and communicate with each other and with other types of cells, like muscle cells. A nerve impulse conduction is an electrochemical process, which means that it uses electricity made with chemical molecules. In other words, the electricity in the brain is not produced by electrons flowing the way they do through a household electrical wire. The nucleus of a neuron is located in the cell body. Extending out from the cell body are processes called dendrites and axons. These processes vary in number and relative length, but always serve to conduct impulses, with dendrites conducting impulses toward the cell body and axons conducting impulses away from the cell body. Neurons can respond to stimuli and conduct impulses because a membrane potential is established across the cell membrane. In other words, there is an unequal distribution of ions or charged atoms on the two sides of a nerve cell membrane. Nerves' communication with body organs. We read from Fundamentals of Christian Education, page 23, that the violation of physical law and the consequence, human suffering, have so long prevailed that men and women look upon the present state of sickness, suffering, debility, and premature death as the appointed lot of humanity. The vital forces have been greatly weakened by the indulgence of appetite and lustful passion. As we look at the image, we see the nerves of the body, both the brain nerve and the body nerve, connecting with every faculties, every senses, every organs of the body. On the left side, we see the 11th system, And they are not in alphabetical order, but in the order as you could study them from your body, starting with the main system controlling all the others, the nervous system, the integumentary system having to do with your skin and all the parts of the body related to that system, the skeletal system, which has to do with the bones, the muscular system, which has to do with the muscles, the respiratory system, which has to do with your lungs, the cardiovascular system relating to the heart, the digestive system relating to the stomach and the intestines, the urinary system relating to the kidneys, the reproductive system relating to both male and female reproduction system, and the lymphatic and endocrine system. Taken from Insight magazine from Dr. Chalmers, we have here a description of a nerve pathway complex new discovery. From all parts of the body, messages are sent to the brain along a series of nerve cells. Recently, it has been discovered that a small growth appears on the end of the sending fiber of the nerve cell each time a thought action is repeated. Thus, it enlarges so that it becomes easier to repeat that same thought or action. The sobering thought then is that every thought, feeling, or act repeated is producing physical and chemical changes in our nerve pathways, either to bless or curse us when these changes have been strongly established. The disobedience of Adam and Eve in Genesis 3 did not bring spiritual woes only upon the human race. The scientific electrical measurement of the membranes of tissue of muscles or nerves with an instrument called voltmeter demonstrates the physical damage their transgression has brought on the human body, specifically through the nervous system. But the Creator and Redeemer intends to repair both the spiritual and physical damages through the work in the sanctuary, the help message, and especially the final atonement. Taken from the book Testimonies, Volume 3, pages 138 139, we read, God endowed man with so great vital force that he has withstood the accumulation of disease brought upon the race in consequence of perverted habits and has continued for 6,000 years. This fact of itself is enough to evidence to us the strength and electrical energy that God gave to man at his creation. It took more than 2,000 years of crime and indulgence of base passions to bring bodily disease upon the race to any great extent. If Adam, at his creation, had not been endowed with 20 times as much vital force as men now have, the race, with their present habits of living in violation of nature law, would have become extinct. As we take a few minutes now to look at the image of the neuron and the physiology of the neuron and glial cells, we will learn many important details about the work and function of the neuron. Two striking features of the neurons are, number one, their highly developed ability to generate and conduct electrical messages called nerve impulses, and number two, their limited ability to regenerate. The brain and spinal cord are made up of many cells, including neurons and glial cells. Neurons are cells that send and receive electrochemical signals to and from the brain and the nervous system. There are about 100 billion neurons in the brain. There are many more glial cells. They provide support functions for the neurons and are far more numerous than neurons. There are many types of neurons. They vary in size from 4 microns to 100 microns in diameter. Their length varies from a fraction of an inch to several feet. Neurons are nerve cells that transmit nerve signals to and from the brain at up to 200 miles per hour. The neuron consists of a cell body or soma with branching dendrites, which are signal receivers, and a projection called an axon, which conduct the nerve signal. At the other end of the axon terminals transmit the electrochemical signal across a synapse, which is the gap between the axon terminal and the receiving cell. The axon, a long extension of a nerve cell, takes information away from the cell body. Bundles of action are known as nerves, or within the central nervous system as nerve tracts or pathways. Dendrites bring information to the cell body. As we continue now the study of the electrical measurement of the membranes, specifically of a tissue of muscles or nerves, we will look now at the establishment of the resting membrane potential. As a reminder, this study is very important. We are looking at the amount of vital force or electricity now produced by the human body compared to Adam and Eve at their creation, where they had 20 times more vital force than we have today. Membranes are polarized, or in other words, exhibit a resting membrane potential. This means that there is an unequal distribution of ions, which are atoms with a positive or negative charge on the two sides of the nerve cell membrane. This potential generally measures about 70 millivolts, with the inside of the membrane negative with respect to the outside. So the resting membrane potential is expressed as minus 70 millivolt, and the minus means that the inside is negative relative to or compared to the outside. In parentheses, minus 70 millivolt is very small. A millivolt is 1 over 1,000 volt. To activate a clock, for example, we use a battery of 1.5 volt. In this case, the membrane potential at rest is minus 70 millivolt. Very, very small energy or electricity. And we continue. It is called a resting potential because it occurs when a membrane is not being stimulated or conducting impulses. In other words, it is resting. What factors contribute to this membrane potential? Two ions are responsible: sodium, Ne+, and potassium, K+. An unequal distribution of these two ions occurs on the two sides of a nerve cell membrane because carriers actively transport these two ions, sodium from the inside to the outside and potassium from the outside to the inside. As a result of this active transport mechanism, commonly referred to as the sodium-potassium pump, there is a higher concentration of sodium on the outside than the inside, and a higher concentration of potassium on the inside than the outside. An action potential chart can help illustrate the resting potential compared to an action potential. An action potential is a very rapid change in membrane potential that occurs when a nerve cell membrane is stimulated. Specifically, the membrane potential goes from the resting potential, typically minus 70 millivolt, as you observe the red line going up and down, to some positive value, typically about plus 30 millivolt, in a very short period of time, just a few milliseconds. Now, a few words on electrolytes and what are they and what do they do for the human body. The 7 major electrolytes in the human body are 4 positive and 3 negative. The 4 positives are sodium, potassium, magnesium, and calcium. The 3 negative are chloride, phosphate, bicarbonate. Electrolytes are minerals in your body that have an electric charge. They are in your blood, urine, tissues, and other body fluids. Electrolytes are important because they help balance the amount of water in your body, balance your body's acid-base pH level, move nutrients into your cells, move waste out of your cells, make sure that your nerves, muscle, heart, brain work the way they should. Sodium, potassium, calcium, magnesium, chlorine, phosphate, and bicarbonate are all electrolytes. You get them from the foods you eat and the fluids you drink. The level of electrolytes in your body can become too low or too high. This can happen when the amount of water in your body changes. The amount of water that you take in should equal the amount you lose. If something upsets this balance, you may have too little water, which is called dehydration, or too much water, which is overhydration. Some medicines, vomiting, diarrhea, sweating, and liver or kidney problems can all upset your water balance. Treatment helps you to manage the imbalance. It also involves identifying and treating what caused the imbalance. At this point, we believe that we can draw a conclusion to the study we just did, though brief, on the electrical measurement of the membranes of a tissue of muscles or nerves. We are reminded in Testimonies, Volume 3, pages 138-139, God endowed man with so great vital force that he has withstood the accumulation of disease brought upon the race in consequence of perverted habits and has continued for 6,000 years. This fact of itself is enough to evidence to us the strength and electrical energy that God gave to man at his creation. It took more than 2,000 years of crime and indulgence of base passions to bring bodily disease upon the race to any great extent. If Adam at his creation had not been endowed with 20 times as much vital force as men now have, the race, with their present habits of living in violation of nature law, would have become extinct. We saw that the electrical measurements indicate that the inside of the membrane of a muscle or nerve becomes plus 30 millivolt with respect to the outside. Thus, the potential inside the membrane changes from minus 70 millivolt to 0 millivolt to plus 30 millivolt. Now applying the quote that we have just read, where we are told that if Adam at his creation had not been endowed with 20 times as much vital force as men now have, we can see the result would have become an extinction of the human race. Thus, 20 multiplied by 30 millivolt would indicate that man at his creation had a much greater vital force than we have today, and we are presenting it as a mathematical base of 600 millivolt. Although we remember a millivolt is 1 over 1,000 volt, it's still much greater than what human bodies today are running at, 30 millivolt. So this again is to demonstrate what the transgression of Adam and Eve in Genesis 3 has caused to the human body, not only spiritually, with bringing the separation between man and his creator, but also physically, where today we are much more weak and lower in vital force than when man was created. And it is the plan of redemption, the plan of restoration of the Creator Redeemer to repair the breach that have been caused because of the transgression of the law of God. This upside down chart is not a mistake. This is actually the way every child, since Adam sinned, is born. The lower power controlling the higher power. The appetite, the passion, and the desire having taken control of the intellect, conscience, and reasons because the will has been submitted to the enemy of souls. And this is the plan of redemption, the plan of restoration that is offered to every human being to submit their will back to the Creator Redeemer in order to be restored to the right mind, the perfect mind of Christ. The decision is yours. Part 2. Brain nerves under attack. 5 consequences of man's separation from God. First, man became the habitation of demons. Second, man's faculties were perverted. Third, man's lower nature rules the higher. Fourth, man's sinful mind is characterized by selfishness. Fifth, man inherits a sinful nature. The first consequence, man became the habitation of demons. We read in the book of Mark chapter 5 verses 2 and 6 to 13, "And when he had come out of the boat, immediately there met him from out of the tombs a man with an unclean spirit. But when he saw Jesus afar off, he ran and worshipped him, and cried with a loud voice, and said, What have I to do with thee, Jesus, thou Son of the Most High God? I adjure thee by God that thou torment me not. For he had said unto him, Come out of the man, thou unclean spirit. And Jesus asked him, What is thy name? And he answered, saying, My name is Legion, for we are many. And he besought him much that he would not send them away out of the country. Now there was there nigh unto the mountains a great herd of swine feeding. And all the devils besought him, saying, Send us into the swine, that we may enter into them. And forthwith Jesus gave them leave. And the unclean spirits went out, and entered into the swine, and the herd ran violently down a steep place, and into the sea. They were about 2,000, and were choked into the sea. In the book Desire of Ages, page 36, we are revealed that the deception of sin had reached its height. All the agencies for depraving the souls of men had been put in operation. The Son of God, looking upon the world, beheld suffering and misery. With pity, he saw how men had become victims of satanic cruelty. He looked with compassion upon those who were being corrupted, murdered, and lost. They had chosen a ruler who chained them to his car as captives. Bewildered and deceived, they were moving on in gloomy procession toward eternal ruin, to death in which is no hope of life, toward night to which comes no morning. Such was the prospect upon which the world's Redeemer looked. What a spectacle for infinite purity to behold! In the book Testimonies, Volume 5, page 267, we read, "We have great victories to gain and a heaven to lose if we do not gain them. The carnal heart must be crucified, for its tendencies is to moral corruption, and the end thereof is death. Nothing but the life-giving influences of the gospel can help the soul. Pray that the mighty energies of the Holy Spirit, with all their quickening, recuperative, and transforming power, may fall like an electric shock on the palsy-stricken soul, causing every nerve to thrill with new life, restoring the whole man from his dead, earthly, sensual state to spiritual soundness." In the book Evangelism, page 609, we are told that Satan presented to Eve a freedom and bliss for them to enjoy, which they never conceived was possible. In Counsels on Diet and Foods, page 73, we read, "One of the most deplorable effects of the original apostasy was the loss of man's power of self-control. Only as this power is regained can there be real progress. The body is the only medium through which the mind and the soul are developed for the upbuilding of character. Hence it is that the adversary of souls directs his temptations to the enfeebling and degrading of the physical powers. His success here means the surrender to evil of the whole being. The tendencies of our physical nature, unless under the dominion of a higher power, will surely work ruin and death." Ministry of Healing, page 142. Satanic agencies took possession of man. The bodies of human beings, made for the dwelling place of God, became the habitation of demons. The senses, the nerves, the organs of man were worked by supernatural agencies in the indulgence of the vilest lust. The very stamp of demons was impressed upon the countenances of man. Human faces reflected the expression of the legions of evil with which men were possessed. Testimonies, Volume 3, page 417. Imagination and nerves have been under the control of demons. And Testimonies, Volume 2, page 347. Man, the noblest being upon the earth, formed in the image of God, transforms himself into a beast. He makes himself gross and corrupt. Degrading sin is enervating the system and destroying the brain nerve power. The sensitive nerves of the brain have lost their healthy tone by morbid excitation to gratify unnatural desire for sensual indulgence. The brain nerves, which communicate with the entire system, are the only medium to which heaven can communicate to man and affect his inmost life. Whatever disturbs the circulation of the electric currents in the nervous system lessens the strength of the vital powers, and the result is a deadening of the sensibilities of the mind. Our higher calling, page 110. The enemy is a master worker, and if God's people are not constantly led by the Spirit of God, they will be snared and taken. For thousands of years, Satan has been experimenting upon the properties of the human mind, and he has learned to know it well. By his subtle workings in these last days, he is linking the human mind with his own, imbuing it with his thoughts. And he is doing this work in so deceptive a manner that those who accept his guidance know not that they are being led by him at his will. The great deceiver hopes so to confuse the minds of men and women that none but his voice will be heard. Mind, Character, and Personality, Volume 1, page 18. Satan is continually seeking to influence human minds by his subtle arts. He is a mastermind given of God, but prostituted with all its noble capabilities to oppose and to make of no effect the counsels of the Most High. From the same book, page 19, in these days, when skepticism and infidelity so often appear in a scientific garb, we need to be guarded on every hand. Through this means, our great adversary is deceiving thousands and leading them captive according to his will. The advantage he takes of the sciences which pertain to the human mind, is tremendous. Here, serpent-like, he imperceptibly creeps in to corrupt the work of God. Evangelism, page 609. Satanic agents claim to cure disease. They attribute their power to electricity, magnetism, or the so-called sympathetic remedies, while in truth they are but channels for Satan's electric currents. By this means he casts a spell over the bodies and soul of man. The second consequence, man's faculties were perverted. Genesis chapter 4, verses 5 to 8. And Cain was very wroth, and his countenance fell. And the Lord said unto Cain, Why art thou wroth, and why is thy countenance fallen? If thou doest well, shall thou not be accepted? And if thou doest not well, sin lieth at the door. And unto thee shall be his desire, and thou shalt rule over him. And Cain talked with Abel his brother. And it came to pass, when they were in the field, that Cain rose up against Abel his brother, and slew him. Review and Herald, March 1, 1887, page 129. In creating man, God gave him noble qualities. He endowed him with a well-balanced mind and made every power of his being harmonious. After the fall, there was not given to man another set of faculties. The powers given him before sin entered the world through Adam were high, and their aims holy. all in perfect harmony with the divine mind. The fall did not create in man new faculties, energies, and passions, for this would have been a reflection upon God. It was through disobedience to God's requirements that these powers were perverted. The affections were misplaced and turned from the high and holy purpose to a lower aim and to meet a lower standard. Originally, man's affections were in perfect obedience to God's will, but they have been perverted, misused, and degenerated by disobedience. The faculties have been warped in a wrong direction. Messages to Young People, page 54. The will of man is aggressive and is constantly striving to bend all things to its purposes. When Satan is permitted to mold the will, he uses it to accomplish his ends. He instigates theories of unbelief and stirs up the human heart to war against the Word of God. With persistent, persevering effort, he seeks to inspire man with his own energies of hate and antagonism to God, and to array them in opposition to the institutions and requirements of heaven and the operations of the Holy Spirit. He enlists under his standard all evil agencies and brings them into the battlefield under his generalship to oppose evil against good. The third consequence of man's separation from God: man's lower nature rules the higher nature. Romans chapter 7, verses 14 to 23. For we know that the law is spiritual, but I am carnal, sold under sin. For that which I do, I allow not. For what I would, that do I not. But what I hate, that do I. If then I do that which I would not, I consent unto the law that it is good. Now then it is no more I that do it, but sin that dwelleth in me. For I know that in me, that is in my flesh, dwelleth no good thing. For to will is present with me, but how to perform that which is good I find not. For the good that I would I do not, but the evil which I would not, that I do. Now, if I do that I would not, it is no more I that do it, but sin that dwelleth in me. I find then a law, that when I would do good, evil is present with me. For I delight in the law of God after the inward man. But I see another law in my members, warring against the law of my mind, and bringing me into captivity to the law of sin, which is in my members. Temperance, page 146. Man, through yielding to Satan's temptation to indulge in temperance, brings the higher faculties in subjection to the animal appetites and passions, and when these gain the ascendancy, man, who was created a little lower than the angels, with faculties susceptible of the highest cultivation, surrenders to the control of Satan. And he gains easy access to those who are in bondage to appetite. Through intemperance, some sacrifice 1/2 and others 2/3 of their physical, mental, and moral powers, and become playthings for the enemy. Fundamentals of Christian Education, page 23. Since Adam's fall, The race has been degenerating. God did not create the race in its present feeble condition. This state of things is not the work of providence, but the work of man. It has been brought about by wrong habits and abuses, by violating the laws that God has made to govern man's existence. Through the temptation to indulge appetite, Adam and Eve first fell from their high, holy, and happy estate. And it is through the same temptation that the race have become enfeebled. They have permitted appetite and passion to take the throne and to bring into subjection reason and intellect. From the same book, pages 23 and 24. The violation of physical law and the consequent human suffering have so long prevailed that man and woman look upon the present state of sickness, suffering, debility, and premature death as the appointed lot of humanity. Man came from the hand of his Creator, perfect and beautiful in form, and so filled with vital force that it was more than 1,000 years before his corrupt appetites and passions and general violations of physical law were sensibly felt upon the race. More recent generations have felt the pressure of infirmity and disease still more rapidly and heavily with every generation. The vital forces have been greatly weakened by the indulgence of appetite and lustful passion. Testimonies, Volume 5, page 515. You must remember that your will is the spring of all your actions. This will that forms so important a factor in the character of man was at the fall given into the control of Satan, and he has ever since been working in man to will and to do of his own pleasure, but to the utter ruin and misery of man. Desire of Ages, page 466. Every soul that refuses to give himself to God is under the control of another power. He is not his own. He may talk of freedom, but he is in the most abject slavery. He is not allowed to see the beauty of truth, for his mind is under the control of Satan. While he flatters himself that he is following the dictates of his own judgment, he obeys the will of the Prince of Darkness. Christ came to break the shackles of sin slavery from the soul. If the Son therefore shall make you free, ye shall be free indeed. The law of the Spirit of life in Christ Jesus sets us free from the law of sin and death. From the same book, page 324. Unless we do yield ourselves to the control of Christ, we shall be dominated by the wicked one. We must inevitably be under the control of the one or the other of the two great powers that are contending for the supremacy of the world. It is not necessary for us deliberately to choose the service of the kingdom of darkness in order to come under its dominion. We have only to neglect to ally ourselves with the kingdom of light. If we do not cooperate with the heavenly agencies, Satan will take possession of the heart and will make it his abiding place. The only defense against evil is the indwelling of Christ in the heart through faith in his righteousness. Unless we become vitally connected with God, we can never resist the unhallowed effects of self-love, self-indulgence, and temptation to sin. We may leave off many bad habits. For the time we may part company with Satan, but without a vital connection with God, through the surrender of ourselves to Him moment by moment, we shall be overcome. Without a personal acquaintance with Christ and a continual communion, we are at the mercy of the enemy and shall do his bidding in the end. The fourth consequence of man's separation from God. Man's sinful mind is characterized by selfishness. 1 Corinthians chapter 13, verses 1 to 7 and 13. Though I speak with the tongues of men and of angels, but have not charity, I am become as sounding brass or a tinkling cymbal. And though I have the gift of prophecy, and understand all mysteries and all knowledge, and though I have all faith so that I could remove mountains, but have not charity, I am nothing. And though I bestow all my goods to feed the poor, and though I give my body to be burned, but I have not charity, it profiteth me nothing. Charity suffereth long, and is kind. Charity envieth not. Charity vaunteth not itself, is not puffed up, does not behave itself unseemly, seeketh not her own, is not easily provoked, thinketh no evil, rejoiceth not in iniquity, but rejoiceth in the truth, beareth all things, believeth all things, hopeth all things, endureth all things. Charity never faileth. And now abideth faith, hope, charity, these three, but the greatest of these is charity. Desire of Ages, pages 435, 436. The Savior gathered his disciples about him and said to them, If any man desire to be first, the same shall be last of all, and servant of all. There was in these words a solemnity and impressiveness which the disciples were far from comprehending. That which Christ discerned they could not see. They did not understand the nature of Christ's kingdom, and this ignorance was the apparent cause of their contention. But the real cause lay deeper. By explaining the nature of the kingdom, Christ might for the time have quelled their strife, but this would not have touched the underlying cause. Even after they had received the fullest knowledge, any question of precedence might have renewed the trouble. Thus, disaster would have been brought to the church after Christ's departure. The strife for the highest place was the outworking of that same spirit which was the beginning of the great controversy in the worlds above, and which had brought Christ from heaven to die. There rose up before him a vision of Lucifer, the son of the morning, in glory surpassing all the angels that surround the throne, and united in closest ties to the Son of God. Lucifer had said, I will be like the Most High, and the desire for self-exaltation had brought strife into the heavenly courts, and had banished a multitude of the hosts of God. Had Lucifer really desired to be like the Most High, he would never have deserted his appointed place in heaven, for the Spirit of the Most High is manifested in unselfish ministry. Lucifer desired God's power, but not his character. He sought for himself the highest place, and every being who is actuated by his spirit will do the same. Thus alienation, discord, and strife will be inevitable. Dominion becomes the prize of the strongest. The kingdom of Satan is a kingdom of force. Every individual regards every other as an obstacle in the way of his own advancement, or a stepping stone on which he himself may climb to a higher place. Counsels to Teachers, page 33. Under God, Adam was to stand at the head of the earthly family to maintain the principles of the heavenly family. This would have brought peace and happiness. But the law that none liveth to himself, Satan was determined to oppose. He desired to live for self. He sought to make himself a center of influence. It was this that had incited rebellion in heaven, and it was man's acceptance of this principle that brought sin on earth. When Adam sinned, man broke away from the heaven-ordained center. A demon became the central power in the world. Where God's throne should have been, Satan placed his throne. The world laid its homage as a willing offering at the feet of the enemy. From the same book, the transgression of God's law brought woe and death in its train. Through disobedience, men's powers were perverted and selfishness took the place of love. His nature became so weakened that it was impossible for him to resist the power of evil, and the tempter saw being fulfilled his purpose to thwart the divine plan of man's creation and fill the earth with misery and desolation. Man had chosen a ruler who chained them to his car as captives. Christ's Object Lessons, page 200 and 201. Whatever the appearance may be, every life centered in self squandered. Whoever attempts to live apart from God is wasting his substance. He is squandering the precious years, squandering the powers of mind and heart and soul, and working to make himself bankrupt for eternity. The man who separates from God that he may serve himself is the slave of Mammon. The mind that God created for the companionship of angels has become degraded to the service of that which is earthly and bestial. This is the end to which self-serving tends. Christ's Object Lessons, page 332. A character formed according to the divine likeness is the only treasure that we can take from this world to the next. Those who are under the instruction of Christ in this world will take every divine attainment with them to the heavenly mansions. And in heaven, we are continually to improve. How important, then, is the development of character in this life. Fifth consequence of man's separation from God. Man inherits a sinful nature. Psalm 51, verses 1 to 13. Have mercy upon me, O God, according to thy loving kindness. According unto the multitude of thy tender mercies, blot out my transgressions. Wash me thoroughly from my iniquity, and cleanse me from my sin. For I acknowledge my transgressions, and my sin is ever before me. Against thee only have I sinned, and done this evil in thy sight, that thou mightest be justified when thou speakest, and be clear when thou judgest. Behold, I was shaped in iniquity, and in sin did my mother conceive me. Behold, thou desiredst truth in my inward parts, and in the hidden part thou shalt make me to know wisdom. Purge me with hyssop, and I shall be clean. Wash me, and I shall be whiter than snow. Make me to hear joy and gladness, that the bones which thou hast broken may rejoice. Hide thy face from my sins, and blot out all my iniquities. Create in me a clean heart, O God, and renew a right spirit within me. Cast me not away from thy presence, and take not thy Holy Spirit from me. Restore unto me the joy of thy salvation, and uphold me with thy free spirit. Then will I teach transgressors thy ways, and sinners shall be converted unto thee. Education, page 29. Not only intellectual but spiritual power, a perception of right, a desire for goodness, exist in every heart. But against these principles there is struggling an antagonistic power. The result of the eating of the tree of knowledge of good and evil is manifest in every man's experience. There is in his nature a bent to evil, a force which, unaided, he cannot resist. To withstand this force, to attain that ideal which in his inmost soul he accepts as alone worthy, he can find help in but one power. That power is Christ. Cooperation with that power is man's greatest need. Ministry of Healing, page 173. You must hold fast to those whom you are trying to help, else victory will never be yours. They will be continually tempted to evil. Again and again they will be almost overcome by the craving for strong drink. Again and again they may fall, but do not because of this cease your efforts. They have decided to make an effort to live for Christ, but their willpower is weakened, and they must be carefully guarded by those who watch for souls as they that must give an account. They have lost their manhood, and this they must win back. Many have to battle against strong hereditary tendencies to evil, unnatural cravings, sensual impulses, were their inheritance from birth. These must be carefully guarded against. Within and without, good and evil are striving for the mastery. Those who have never passed through such experiences cannot know the almost overmastering power of appetite or the fierceness of the conflict between habits of self-indulgence and the determination to be temperate in all things. Over and over again, the battles must be fought. Adventist Home, page 241. The thoughts and feelings of the mother will have a powerful influence upon the legacy she gives her child. If she allows her mind to dwell upon her own feelings, if she indulges in selfishness, if she is peevish and exacting, the disposition of her child will testify to the fact. Thus many have received as a birthright almost unconquerable tendencies to evil. The enemy of souls understands this matter much better than do many parents. He will bring his temptations to bear upon the mother, knowing that if she does not resist him, he can, through her, affect her child. The mother's only hope is in God. She may flee to him for strength and grace, and she will not seek in vain. From the same book, page 242. She by whose life-blood the child is nourished, and its physical frame built up, imparts to it also mental and spiritual influences that tend to the shaping of mind and character. Again from the same book, page 256. If before the birth of her child she is self-indulgent, if she is selfish, impatient, and exacting, these traits will be reflected in the disposition of the child. Thus many children have received as a birthright almost unconquerable tendencies to evil. But if the mother unswervingly adheres to right principles, if she is temperate, and self-denying, if she's kind, gentle, and unselfish, she may give her child these same precious traits of character. Patriarchs and Prophets, page 306. Visiting the iniquity of the fathers upon the children unto the third and fourth generation of them that hate me. It is inevitable that children should suffer from the consequences of parental wrongdoing, but they are not punished for the parents' guilt, except as they participate in their sins. It is usually the case, however, that children walk in the steps of their parents. By inheritance and example, the sons become partakers of the father's sin. Wrong tendencies, perverted appetites, and debased morals, as well as physical disease and degeneracy, are transmitted as a legacy from father to son to the third and fourth generation. This fearful truth should have a solemn power to restrain man from following a course of sin. In conclusion, on part 2, after his separation from his Maker, man did not cease to be a temple, but instead, as he chose to become independent from the Holy Spirit, he became an habitation of demons. By submitting his will to Satan and following his direction, man's character of love was replaced by a self-centered character like the character of his new master. Satan, who understood the laws governing the operation of man's mind, immediately took possession of the very channel God had designed to use for communicating with man for the complete, connected, and harmonious development of his faculties. Consequently, after man submitted his will to him, Satan, the brain nerves fell under the control of demons and became the channel for Satan's electric currents by which he cast his spells over the body and souls of man. Fundamentals of Christian Education, page 499. Refusing to follow in the path of obedience, they transferred their allegiance to Satan. The enemy rejoiced in his success in effacing the divine image from the minds of the people that God had chosen as his representatives. Thus, Satan took over the brain nerves and brought disharmony, perversion, and destruction. Man became affected and infected by sin. This was his new carnal nature. The lower power were now governing the higher power. Man's natures and faculties were so completely perverted by this new unholy connection resulting from his own choice that his offspring inherited a perverted, sinful nature. Adam's first son, Cain, killed his brother Abel, first generation of dysfunctional family. It was natural for Cain to follow his depraved inclination and passions in subjecting the higher center of his mind to the lower. Sin had brought a change of relationship which caused a perversion of faculties rather than a transaction in which certain holy faculties were exchanged for unholy faculties.